They say I seduced Caesar to gain power, but only those who have never loved believe that love is weakness. I was never looking for war, but when you love the man who rules the world, love becomes a battlefield. My name is Cleopatra Philopator, Queen of Egypt, last of the Ptolemaic family. They say I loved power. Maybe I did. And now, I'll tell you how a palace girl became a woman who made the world bow its head. I was born in Alexandria, a city that smelled of the sea, parchment, and power. I was the daughter of Ptolemy XII, a king who loved music, wine, and, well, let's just say he had a rather artistic approach to ruling. My family, the Ptolemies, were not Egyptian. They were Greeks who took Egypt as a gift from Alexander the Great, and I, ironically, was the first of our family to actually learn the language of my people. I spoke Egyptian, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, 9 languages in all. I told myself that if I wanted to rule the people, I should at least understand them. A childhood in the palace. Oh yes, elephants in the courtyard, silk in the chambers, and a spy behind every curtain. There was no talk of power in my house. It was whispered about. I had brothers and sisters, but it was more like a chessboard than a family. Each of us was a piece, and each of us wanted to be king. I soon learned that we didn't inherit the crown. The crown must be played for. While the other girls were learning to dance, I was reading about stars, taxes, and politics. Does that sound boring? Maybe. But believe me, there's nothing more charming than the mind in a woman's head. As I strolled along the terrace of the palace, looking out over the Nile, I thought to myself that the stream is like our lives. You can stand up to it, but it will still carry you away. I knew even then that there was more to me than a golden throne and a silk robe, because being Queen of Egypt, it's not just about ruling, it means surviving. I was born into the world where you don't share power unless the Pharaoh's will commands it, and my father, Ptolemy XII, apparently believed that family harmony could be ordered with parchment. After his death, I was to become Queen of Egypt, but because tradition was more stubborn than logic, I was to rule with my brother, Ptolemy XIII. He was barely 10. I was 18. So yes, I was married to my own brother. They said it was a custom of the gods. I say it was their bad joke. In the beginning, it was still good. I ruled, he learned to read. But the more he grew, the more his mentors whispered that Egypt doesn't need a queen who thinks, and that a woman who speaks more than she commands is a threat. At first, I overlooked it, with a smile, with calm, and a little venom in her gaze that could break a desert wind. But then the moment came when the whisper turned into an order. One day, I found out that my name had disappeared from the official rolls, from coins, from temple prayers. My brother, or rather his advisors, had dethroned me. My palace became a trap, my servants became spies, and my throne an empty chair. That evening I stood on the balcony looking out into the distance, and I realized that Egypt had taken its queens, would not keep their queens for free. I had to leave, not as a loser but as a player who just changed her move. I went east to Syria. I only had a few loyalists with me, a few treasure chests, and a head full of plans. They said I was finished, but I just moved on to another chessboard. It was the first time I'd seen Syria, what it means to build power from scratch. I was recruiting soldiers, negotiating contracts, convincing men who looked up to me that I was a general. And you know what? It worked. While my brother was in Alexandria throwing parties, I was raising an army. and every soldier who joined was the next step towards my return. That's when I understood that being queen was not the same as wearing a crown. It means never giving up, even when the world tells you you're a failure. They say you need an army to return to the throne. All I needed was an idea and a rug. When I gathered enough soldiers in Syria, I headed back to the borders of Egypt. I was determined to reclaim it, what was mine. But it was clear that brute force was not enough. For power is not gained by the sword, it is by reason. At that time, a man arrived in Alexandria. Gaius Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, a Roman warlord in pursuit of his rival Pompey. And as is the way of Egypt, things got a bit messy. My brother, still just a boy controlled by his advisors, had Pompey murdered to please Rome. But Caesar was not a man you please by murder. When Pompey's head was brought to him, he acted calmly, and then he got angry. At that moment, I knew it was my time. Caesar needed order in Egypt. I was that order in female form. There was only one problem. My brother wouldn't even let me cross the palace threshold to the king, and so I had to be resourceful. The night was quiet. I let the carpet wrap me up. Yes, literally. No magic, no trick of the gods. Just a piece of cloth and a good plan. 2 of my servants carried me to the palace, claiming to be carrying a gift for Caesar. The guards let them in, and so it was done. I re-entered my city years later, not in triumph, but in silence. When they unwrapped me in the chamber and I rose from the carpet, Caesar paused. A woman stood before him, whom no one had ever expected. I smiled at him and said, "I'm sorry she didn't check in, but the arrival of a goddess is a surprise." Caesar laughed, and I knew I had won the first battle. We talked for a long time that night, about Egypt, about its confusion, the government, my betrayal, and a little about the stars. He seemed to be impressed that I could quote Greek philosophers. The Romans are not used to it, that a woman can do more than smile and keep silent. And so we made a deal. He will help me reclaim the throne. I will help Egypt rise again. And maybe, just maybe, between the lines we helped each other too. By morning there was no doubt. Caesar declared that I and my brother would rule together, as our father had decreed. My brother was furious. His advisors were even more furious. But I only smiled, because I knew the power was in my hands again. And when Caesar turned to leave, he said, "Queens usually need an army. You used the carpet. Tell me, Cleopatra, what will you use next?" "A smile, I suppose," I replied. "That one is lighter to carry." You know, people often think that victory looks like a march with fanfare. In reality, it's just silence after the right move, and I just made that move. After our encounter with Caesar, everything changed. Rome was on my side, and my brother Ptolemy XIII understood too late. Alexandria was divided. On one side, me, the queen who had returned. On the other, he, the boy whose counselors kept whispering in his ears that the world belonged to men. Their fault. The world belongs to those who can think. The war for Egypt lasted months. The city became a labyrinth of smoke and sand. Battles were fought on the Nile, in the harbor, and in the streets. And while Caesar commanded his legions, I was in charge of negotiations, gathering supplies and writing orders. We were the perfect couple. He, the strategist, I, the diplomat. One night, when Alexandria was burning, we stood together on the terrace. "They say you're a dangerous woman," he said. I smiled. That's what all men say when they meet a woman who knows what she wants. It is said that during the fighting, Part of the famous Library of Alexandria was burned. Yes, it hurt me. But every rebirth needs a little ash, and that was the day I reborn Egypt. When the war was over, Ptolemy was defeated. He fled across the Nile, but the river has a memory and knows very well who to keep. His body was never found. I am back on the throne, not as the Pharaoh's daughter, but as a woman who won her own destiny. Caesar stood beside me. The Romans said I had bewitched him. Perhaps he did, but he was a man who understood the power of reason, and he liked mine as much as he liked my smile. From our union a son was born, Caesarion, my little king. The Romans were furious. They said I was breaking the order of the world, that a woman from Egypt could not bear an heir to a Roman hero. I answered them, and yet, that is what has just happened. Caesar laughed. He told me I was a woman who could make statues talk, and maybe he was right, because I made him do something no woman had ever done before, to acknowledge me as his equal. Our reign lasted several years. Egypt grew rich again, the ports filled with ships, and the people loved me, not just because I ruled, but because I understood their voice. When I speak to the people, I don't need a title. The truth is enough, and a little dignity, which, believe me, I have never lacked. When Caesar sailed back to Rome, I watched his ship disappear over the horizon. I knew the view was important, because even when love moves away, the union of two souls that changed history, no one can erase. And in my mind, I said to myself, okay, Rome, it's your turn. When Caesar sailed, Alexandria remained quiet. People told me to celebrate, that I was queen again, that Egypt was united, that Caesarion was a sign of a new era. But I knew the calm was just a break between two storms. To rule alongside a man like Caesar was like dancing with fire, beautiful, but deadly if you lost your rhythm. And he was a man who never forgot that his heart belonged to Rome. I, on the other hand, never forgot that my blood belongs to Egypt. While he was fighting wars, I was building an empire. I reopened the temples, lowered taxes, brought in traders from Arabia, Nubia, and faraway India. My Egypt was rising, and I with it. You would say a woman cannot run an empire. I say a man couldn't do it without a mirror. When Caesar invited me to Rome, I did not hesitate. I wanted the world to see me, not as a mistress, but as a queen. And when I sailed down the Tiber on my golden sail ship, Rome was speechless. People stopped. Whispers grew in the streets. This is she, the one who made Caesar lose his head. I lived in a villa on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by palm trees and the smell of Egypt. The Romans watched me with a mixture of fascination and hatred. Women hated me. Men feared they might love me. The Senate saw me as a threat that Caesar had brought into their court. And they were right, because I was not just a woman from a foreign land. I was a reminder that Rome was not the only one who could rule. I often accompanied Caesar to festivals. We talked about philosophy, the stars, politics, and our sun. He told me that one day he could unite Egypt and Rome. I smiled. Unite two empires that consider themselves divine? That would be interesting. But I could see in his eyes that he believed, that he wanted to change the world. And in that moment, I knew it wouldn't be long before someone tried to take that dream away from him. Rome was a city full of statues, but few souls. People there prayed to power, not wisdom. And I, a woman from Alexandria, felt that the city breathed envy. The senators watched me from behind the columns like hunters waiting for the moment when their prey lets its guard down. One evening, when the cries echoed through the streets, I knew the moment had come. The news arrived a few minutes later. Caesar is dead. I stood still, not even taking a breath. Everything around me was silent. Only my breathing sounded like the wind over the desert. They killed him in the name of the Republic. In fact, they killed him because he had the courage to dream. Rome celebrated the fall of a tyrant. I lost a man who believed the world could be different. That night, I lifted Caesarion into my arms. I looked out the window at the lights of a city that smelled of wine and blood, and I said to him, "Remember, my son, Rome may hate us, but it will fear us. For though Caesar has fallen, his blood flows in you now." The next day we sailed back to Egypt. We left behind Rome, a city of marble that forgot that even stone can crack. Ahead, the Nile, the desert, the stars, and fate. When I returned to Egypt, I was greeted with silence, so quiet I could hear my own heart in it. Rome had killed Caesar, and with it, the last shred of my trust in men who call themselves civilized. The people of Alexandria hailed me as a goddess. Some whispered that I was bad luck, others that I was revenge. I smiled, because they were right on both counts. I took the throne again, this time more firmly than ever. Caesarion was at my side, a little boy with his father's eyes and my soul. When he laughed, the world seemed simpler. When he slept, I watched, because I know the world will never let the children of the mighty sleep in peace. Meanwhile, Rome was drowning in blood. The senators who killed Caesar found they had only opened the door to more chaos. And out of the tangle of evil and ambition, new names rose. Marcus Antonius, a man with the courage of a lion, and Gaius Octavianus, the boy with the cold eyes that smiled only when they planned death. Rome needed Egypt again, and Egypt had me. One day, Roman ships came to my shores. At the head of them was Marcus Antonius. They said he was a soldier who smiled even in hell. I resolved to show him that neither his courage nor his strength could threaten me. I came to him in my ship, golden, with purple sails, studded with jewels. The scent of roses drifted down the river. The music sounded softly like the whispering of snakes. I stood at the bow, dressed in gold that reflected the light of the setting sun. When he saw me, he laughed. "Cleopatra," he said, "you are a legend." I smiled, and you're proof that Rome can still appreciate good taste. There was something between us that could not be denied. He was a soldier. I was a queen. We both loved power and hated weakness. Rome had its laws. Egypt had me. And Mark Antony soon learned that the two worlds could not be tamed, only joined. We invited guests, held feasts, built temples, and people began to believe we were born of the gods. Maybe they were right. Only gods can live with such passion, knowing that one day they will burn. Antony promised me that Egypt would remain free. He said my son Caesarion would one day rule not only here but Rome. I laughed. "Oh, love, you say it so beautifully. I almost forget that Rome has another plan." And I was right, because far to the north, in the marble halls, Octavianus waited patiently, with a smile that was colder than the Nile at night. But I was not afraid. They said I was a witch. I said, "I just know how to listen to my instincts." And they were whispering to me then, "Not yet. This isn't over. This is preparation." They said Marcus Antonius had lost his mind. I say he's finally found it. He found it in my eyes. He brought weapons from Rome, but in Egypt he found something stronger, me. And instead of binding him, I offered him freedom, a freedom that no Roman had ever known. Our days were golden. By day we ruled, by night we forgot the world existed. In a hall with golden ceilings we held banquets that became legend. The wine flowed like the Nile, the music sounded like the breath of the gods. And I danced barefoot between the columns while he looked on, as if he were looking at Egypt itself. People adored us. They said we had become the new Isis and Osiris, and maybe they were right. For what is a god but a man made immortal by love? We had children together, twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and later little Ptolemy Philadelphus. When I saw them sleeping, I thought that for their sake the world must remain whole. But the world had another plan. In Rome, we were spoken of as a sin to be punished. Octavianus spread rumors that I had bewitched Antony's mind. I laughed at it. If I could control him with magic, all Rome would have bowed at my gates long ago. But the truth was simpler. Antony loved me, and that was unforgivable to Rome. As we stood together on the balcony, staring into the darkness, he said to me, "If I had to choose again between you and the empire, I would choose you." I stroked his cheek. "I know that," I replied, "and that's why they're going to destroy us both. We had everything: power, love, beauty, divinity. And that's why we had to fall. The world never forgives those who live too high, but I have no regrets, because in every touch, in every look, in every evening when the Nile was silent and the moon shone like a crown, I knew I had lived more than most people do in a lifetime. They said Antony belonged to Rome, but I know his heart remained in Alexandria until the last blow. They say that when the gods want to have fun, they let people fight over things they've already decided. Year 31 BC. The sea off Actium glittered like a mirror, waiting to see who would make the first mistake. I stood on the deck of my ship, golden with purple sails and jewels that glittered like stars. Everything had to be perfect. When you fall, it should be with grace. Marcus Antonius commanded the fleet, Rome against Rome, brother against brother. But for me, it wasn't a war for power. It was a war for the man I loved more than my throne. Rome betrayed us. The sea turned against us. And the wind that should have brought victory brought only silence, smoke, fire, screams. Our ships turned into burning tombs. Antony tried to keep up the fight, but the battle was already lost before it began. Octavianus had more ships, more men, and less heart. They say I fled the battle, that I betrayed them. Let them say it. I was saving Egypt, not my pride, and he followed me, not because he was afraid, but because he loved. When we arrived in Alexandria, the city was quiet. Everyone knew the end was near. People were fleeing, allies were disappearing. But we stayed, the king and queen, betrayed by love and empire. In the gardens where we once celebrated victory, there was now only silence and ashes. Antony walked like a shadow. Sometimes he laughed, sometimes he was silent for days. In his eyes remained a sea he would never see again. One night he turned to me and said, "Cleopatra, if I could begin again, I wouldn't be a soldier. I'd just be a man who met you in another life." I stroked his hair and whispered, "In another life, I wouldn't have stopped you from being a soldier. I would just teach you to lose with a smile." He laughed, but his smile was as heavy as lead. A few days later, the news came. Octavianus was coming, and this time he didn't come to negotiate. Antony put on his armor. I put on gold. He went to war. I went to history. And the last time I saw him leave, he said, "May the gods judge me by the way I have loved." They say true love never dies, but they forget to add that everything around it does. Alexandria was quiet. There was no laughter in the streets, only the footsteps of soldiers and the cries of seagulls over the harbor. I knew the end was coming, but in Egypt we never feared death, just a bad exit. And so I decided to leave on my own terms. I sent out rumors that I had died. The Romans should have rejoiced. Antony was finally going to leave this endless war, that he could no longer win. But when he heard the news, he drew his sword. All he said was, "Cleopatra is dead, and I have no reason to live without her." When they brought him to me, he was still breathing. Blood was running down his armor, and I watched as the man who once ruled half the world was turning into a man who just wanted to stay by my side. I took him in my arms. He was heavy, tired, beautiful. His eyes opened for a moment, and he smiled faintly. "Well, my queen," he whispered, "not you died, but I died without you." And I answered him, "Don't play the hero, my love. I never wanted to share you with fate." He laughed, half in pain, half in joy, and then he fell silent. I held him until his body went cold, and a single tear rolled down my cheek, not because he died, but because I had to let him go alone. There was a fanfare outside. Octavianus entered the city. Rome was celebrating victory. I sat by his body, slowly removing my gold necklace. Each stone was engraved with the symbol of our name. One by one, I let them fall to the ground. They said I had lost. But if they'd seen the look he gave me for the last time, they would understand that some defeats are more beautiful than all the victories in the world. Rome sent me a message. "Surrender, Cleopatra. Octavianus will guarantee your life." I smiled. Rome should know that I've never lived up to his terms, so why should I die by them? Octavianus entered the palace like one who has come for his prey. He spoke of peace, but his eyes were hungry, not for blood, for triumph. He wanted to see me in Rome, chained, as the trophy that once was queen. He looked at me coldly, and I knew that my time had come. When he left, I shut myself in a small chamber, where once roses smelled and now courage smelled. On the table was a golden goblet of wine and a basket of figs in which a snake was said to be hiding. Maybe it was there, maybe it wasn't. No one will ever know. They say I was bitten by an asp. Others say I drank poison, and some believe I just closed my eyes and decided to leave before someone took my name. But the truth is different. I didn't die to escape defeat. I died so that my story would never be written by someone else. Because even if they tie you up, you can stay free if you refuse to give up yourself. They say I lost, but I know I won. Because after 2,000 years, my name is still spoken with reverence, and the name of those who judged me has long since gone to dust. Rome has come for my children. My firstborn Caesarion, son of Julius Caesar. The Romans killed him shortly after my death. They said, there can't be two Caesars in the world. He was just a boy, but he bore a name that Rome could not bear. The remaining children were taken to Rome, the spoils of victory. Octavianus had them raised in his household, next to his sister Octavia, who was once the wife of my Antony. Ironic, isn't it? My children were raised in the arms of a woman whose husband I loved. Alexandra Helios and Ptolemy both disappeared from history. No one knows where their story ended. Only my daughter Cleopatra Selene survived. She was smart, beautiful, and had the fire of Egypt in her eyes. She married the king of Juba in Mauritania, and when she sat on the throne there, people said that her mother had returned. My Egypt became a Roman province, but the blood of the pharaohs was never lost. It flows on in children, in stones, in the Nile that remembers everything. And perhaps As the sun sets over the pyramids today, and the river glitters with gold, somewhere in the shadows of the temples, my voice still whispers. Here ruled a woman who feared not even Rome, nor fate. So ended my story, not the story of the woman who killed herself, but the story of a woman who chose to live by her own rules until her last breath. If you liked my story, don't forget to support the An Echo of the Past channel by commenting, subscribing, sharing. Every gesture you make helps. The voices of those who speak from the past are not silenced in the dust of time. The past whispers, the future listens.